All right. Hello, David.
Hey, Glenn.
Welcome to the Glenn Show. I guess I'll start off by introducing myself for people that don't know. I'm Glenn Loury II, son of the usual host, Glenn the First, who is a professor at Brown University, and I'm sitting here or talking here with David Blankenhorn, who can introduce himself better than I can, I'm sure.
I'm the president of the Institute for American Values, and it's good to be with you, Glenn. We're a think tank in New York City, work on marriage and family issues. I've known your father a long time. He's a great guy.
Yeah, and I thought, given Barack Obama's recent marriage, if you'll forgive the wordplay, of Stonewall with landmark civil rights events like Seneca Falls and Selma, that we talk about gay marriage, marriage equality, your perspective on marriage. But I wanted to start first more generally with what exactly the aim of the Institute for American Values is in marriage, because as I understand it, you're trying to approach this conversation in a different way from the way it's been discussed in recent years.
Well, our aim as an organization is to study and try to strengthen civil society, the kind of organization, the kind of relationships and institutions that exist sort of between the individual and the state. And marriage is probably our most important civil society institution. So we've been studying this and making proposals around the issue of marriage for many years now. And I guess the new thing that happened, for years I was a very publicly identified proponent of gay marriage. I wrote a book against gay marriage, and I testified. I was the expert witness at the Prop 8 trial in California on the marriage issue. And but last June, I changed my mind on the topic and wrote an article in the paper, and was in the news a little bit just because I had been so I'd been in the public eye as a anti-gay marriage, and then I changed my position on the thing, and it caused a bit of a stir in terms of our organization and the larger public discussion. And when we say now a new conversation, what we really mean is a couple of main things. One is that when I'm going to say my colleagues and I, but we don't have group positions, but so it might be easier if I just said what I think. If I look at marriage today, the real problem I see is the weakening of marriage among kind of working class and lower middle class Americans. There's about 55 or 60% of the country today that has a high school diploma but not a 4-year college degree, and the kind of broad middle of the middle class and working class of America, the kind of broad shoulders of, President Obama talked just about the broad shoulders of the middle class. That group marriage is just sinking like a stone. So in terms of out of wedlock childbearing, single parent homes, and so on. So, while we've been having at the elite level a debate about gay marriage among vast swaths of America is just getting weaker and weaker. So we wanted to focus on that, number one. And number two, the other thing that's new is instead of having the old debate be about gay rights, there's people who are pro-gay rights and pro-gay marriage on the one side and anti those things, or not in favor of those things on the other. We're trying to say, well, what's new about this is that we'd like anybody who wants to strengthen marriage, gay or straight, to be a part of this new conversation. So it invites gay and lesbian leaders who care about marriage not only as a right of access, but who care about it as an institution, to join this conversation. And it doesn't make gay marriage anymore a litmus test of who gets to sit at the marriage table. So that's the other thing that's new about it. And so we're trying our best to kind of, I guess, I don't know whether you would say recenter the conversation, but to focus on the crisis as it exists as the institution, number one, and while at the same time inviting everybody who wants to strengthen it to the table. That's the main part of it.
Yeah, I just wanted to take a step back real quickly because I do want to touch on the New York Times article and your recent, not necessarily conversion, but reapproach to marriage and opening the discussion to the table. But we're not only talking from a great physical distance here, but also a generational gap. I was just 14 when gay marriage was legalized in Massachusetts. I've grown up in a country where divorce, where it was not uncommon for my fellow colleagues, people of my age, to grow up in quote unquote broken homes, perhaps where the father and mother are either got divorced or perhaps were never married to begin with. And as such, I imagine that I have a very different understanding as to the importance or the vital nature of marriage as a social unit as you do. And I just wanted to perhaps push you further on why exactly you think it is so important that we shore up the institution of marriage, which seems to be weakening so much recently.
Well, Glenn, if I could do a little finger pointing at you, the younger generation.
By all means.
I would just say, and not just younger Americans, but Americans in general are more and more thinking of marriage as a private relationship. They think of, marriage is when, two people fall in love and they decide to get married, and that's about it. And to some degree, the marriage is whatever the meaning of that private relationship is. And it's exemplified in the tendency now. I'm 57. I did this too when I got married. We made up our own vows. And now I think it's very common to make up your own vows. And it kind of symbolizes the idea that you say what the marriage is. It's a private relationship. And it kind of exists in your mind and in the minds of society as primarily a private relationship between the lovers. Now, that is not at all what marriage has been in the human experience. Yes, it's always been a private relationship, but it's always been a public relationship as well. It's been a legal relationship. It has a public dimension, and it serves public purposes. That's why we regulate marriage in ways we don't regulate other forms of friendship and so on. And so you're meant. The idea of being married it imposes certain kind of expectations on you. So, and one of them is to stick with it. And there are other things as well. So, the thing I think that's really good about so many younger Americans, I do think the notion of gay equality is just more accepted, I just think it's more accepted, whereas for older people like me, it's been more of a struggle, to come to terms with it. Whereas maybe for people in your age, I don't really know for sure, but it seems to me like people who are now in their 20s, they just more or less take that for granted, most. And so that's, to me, good. What's not so good is the notion of marriage as this privatized thing that's really just whatever the two people say it is. And then the other thing I see, maybe in your generation, I don't know if you see the same thing, is a kind of I won't say cynicism, but wariness, because so many marriages in your parents' generation didn't work out. So I think a lot of younger people might maybe think, well, gosh, is this really supposed to be so great? Is this really what I want?
Yeah, one thing I would say that I have noticed amongst people of my generation, or in a more, at least in my own personal experience, is that marriage, and I know I'm only speaking as someone who's 24, seems to have become less necessary than it once was. I know many people who are getting into romantic relationships, who are even having children, and are not thinking that marriage is the next logical step that they can take. In fact, I can think of many people who have had children with many different people and not ended up marrying a single one of them. And I guess what I want to ask you is, do you think that this goes back to the increased divorce rate of the parents? I guess that's what you were saying. Do you think it stems back to this, that marriage has been devalued so that people see it as less of a necessity?
Yes, I do think that's a part of it. And I think that part of it is the notion of this thing about it's just private, that's the thing. It's not public, it's private. And when people say, why do I need the piece of paper? I already have the relationship. What's the piece of paper? And that is just a very, it just misses the boat. It misses the point of what the thing is. If you, it's the vow, the marriage vow that you take in public, you take it in front of your family and friends and neighbors, and if you're a religious person, you take it in the presence of God. It's meant to make something stronger and more durable than would exist if you were just private people, just having a relationship in your apartment or house somewhere. It's the community recognizes it, your family treats it differently, the law treats it differently. When children come into the picture, there's expectations that you're really going to be there for those children and not just leave them. So marriage is, and by the way, a very funny thing, and your father's a part of this. While the institution itself gets weaker, and fewer people are participating in it in the way that, in this kind of institutional way, the scholarship about how important this is becomes stronger and stronger. I mean, if you look at how kids are doing, you said, people are having children outside of marriage and maybe with, different partners. Well, there's a mountain of evidence as to what happens to children in those situations, and the evidence is depressing, in terms of bad outcomes for them and higher risk factors for them. So this is not a good trend if you look at it from the child's point of view. And I would also say, if you look at it from the adult point of view, it's a diminution of, I think it's just a kind of a lowering of expectation of what you think, what you want your life to be. I mean, most people want to have a partner in life that's going to be there for them and going to see them through the hard times and commit to them unconditionally and to love them always and deeply and completely. People want that, and that's the name we give that, the institution, the word that we created as humans for this kind of relationship is marriage. And if you say, well, that's not what I want, I'm just going to kind of have relationships as they come along and there's not going to be any structure to it, I think you're lowering just kind of settling for less than you want to settle for, is my opinion.
Okay, so yeah, and I guess I wonder to what extent this is a chicken or egg conversation. I mean, which do you think has come first? That as marriages have become more and more likely to disintegrate, people have put less value into them, or because people are putting less value into marriages, or people are expecting marriages to be easier than perhaps they are, less work than you need to put into them, that they have become more and more likely to seek divorce as an option?
It's both. I mean, there's been scholarship on this. Both of the things are there. One of my great mentors, Norval Glenn, who died a couple of years ago, University of Texas, and he says that in a high divorce society, two things are going on. One is that more and more bad marriages are ending in divorce. That would be normal. Divorce is easy. more bad marriages are going to end in divorce. But the other thing that happens in a high divorce society or an easy divorce society is that more and more marriages become unhappy. Now that is less. More and more relationships become more, they break up. Why would that be? And it's because the second point you just made. People are investing less, and they invest in the relationship with less confidence that it's really going to be there for them. So there's a kind of a withholding, both in terms of how you commit yourself, but also in terms of how that commitment is understood by all those around you. And so that produces unhappiness, which leads to more breakups. So both of the things that you mentioned are happening at the same time, and they're reinforcing one another. And the challenge, one of the great things about me, is I try to wrap my head around the gay marriage issue. I mean, at least gay people seem to be about the only ones in the country today that are putting in a good word for marriage. You know what I mean? They seem to think it's great. Let us do it. We got a picture in the paper. We like this. We like this. In better or worse, to have it to hold. I mean, right. I mean, marriage needs all the cheerleaders it can have these days. And I mean, I'm only partly being funny. I think there really is something to it.
All right, yeah, I think that actually leaves us with a good opening to turn to. Again, I'm reluctant to call it your conversion last year, but so much. The way that I read your article, and I was looking through your website, and the way that I understood it, and you can feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, is not so much that your opinion on the rightness of gay marriage or gay relationships has changed, because even when you were one of the leading voices against same-sex marriage, you were very clear in stating that you believe that homosexual love is of equal dignity to that of opposite-sex relationships. And so would you say that it was that as you see this country perhaps becoming more and more accepting the idea of gay marriage, that you yourself thought that might be something that you could latch onto as something that you could leverage into the way you want to approach the discussion as the importance of marriage in general, or would you classify it a different way?
Well, I think what you said is accurate. Some of it for me was realizing that so much of the conversation about gay marriage was essentially a kind of referendum on the issue of gay equality. And so when I was arguing against gay marriage, the thing that as you said, I would try to insist that I did believe in the equal dignity of homosexual love, and I believed in the gay rights movement. But I was arguing against gay marriage because of this question of filiation of mothers and of linking the mother and the father to the child. Every child who comes into this world has a male and a female parent in marriage, and those ties matter. And marriage links the male and the female. Historically, has linked the male and the female who created the child sexually through sexual union to become the legal and social parents of that child. And I thought, and still think, that's just a crucially important fact about our species, and a crucially important thing that can be said in favor of marriage. And I still believe that as strongly as I ever have. But I realized that for so much of the conversation in our country, this really was: are we going to accept gay and lesbian people as equals? Are we just going to treat them with fairness, or are we going to? Is there going to be stigma attached to them? Some kind of stigma, less good. Not as wouldn't just don't like this so much, this gay, and that's where I became so. I don't know whether you would call it. I mean, the word everybody uses now is evolving, but I don't know. I just became more aware of it. I mean, I hadn't thought much about it really, but I was forced to think about it in this debate, and I just became more and more convinced that whatever side was saying, treat people fairly. Don't stigmatize people on the basis of who they are. Then I wanted to be on that side. I didn't want to be on the other side of that argument. And I really think that at some level, that was the big thing for me. And I grew up in the South, and I was born in 1955. I grew up in the South, Mississippi, and I went through the Civil Rights period. That was the big shaping experience for me morally, and I just couldn't bear the thought that somehow there was this other civil right, or there's some kind of, we're going to accept or not accept people as our equals in society, and I don't know, I just couldn't bear to be on the wrong side. I couldn't, what to me seemed to be the wrong side of that argument, even if I thought there were some good reasons that I had, and so that was the main thing. And then the other thing is that, as you say, among your generation, this is not even a very controversial issue anymore. And so I just thought, do I really want to spend the rest of my life having this be the big argument I'm involved in? Or would I like to, try to do something that's fresh, that, brings people together instead of continues to divide them? And I thought, well, if we could get gays and straights working together to strengthen marriage for everyone who seeks it, right? Can we get gays and straights together to strengthen marriage for everybody who seeks it? I thought that was, a worthy goal that didn't involve telling people they were bad or that they couldn't be a part of the conversation. And I don't know if it's going to work or not, but it felt and feels better to me than the old culture war around the gay issue. And so that was another reason why I changed my mind on it. And
right.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, not to cut you off, but I think you're standing at a very interesting nexus in this conversation, because you do sort of come from it from a very unique perspective as someone who was, not to put it in terms of opposition, although that's the way it's always been seen, someone who was quote unquote on the other side,
right.
Someone who has a lot of sympathy for people who are perhaps a little hesitant to embrace gay marriage, someone who may himself still have reservations about gay marriage himself. And I wanted to, because I guess what I wanted to ask you, you sort of have addressed this a little bit already, is after you came out, quote unquote, as someone who wanted to come at this from another perspective, and after all your fundraising has basically from the right dried up, and you had to really, I guess, reposition yourself, where do you want this conversation to go from here? What do you think? What more do you think needs to be said about marriage and how we understand marriage as working in this society, if that makes any sense?
No, that's the question, man. I mean, this is what I wake up every day thinking about. And I would say 3 quick answers to that question. Number 1, reinstitutionalization. I know that's a big, ugly kind of academic word, but it just means beefing up marriage to be more than just a private relationship. I mean, the way we think about it, Dietrich Bonhoeffer famously, when he was in prison about to be killed in 1945, he wrote a letter to an engaged couple, and he said, from this day on, it won't be your love that keeps your marriage alive, it will be your marriage that keeps your love alive. I really love that. That's my favorite thing anybody ever said about marriage. And so I want to reach a day where for younger people, for people your age, that statement, that it's not your love that keeps your marriage alive, it's your marriage that keeps your love alive, I would like to live in a world where that had meaning for people your age, where people knew what that meant and thought it was true. That's number 1. That's what I mean by reinstitutionalization. Number 2, we have to focus on where the real crisis is, which is in kind of lower middle class and blue collar America. This is where things are really. It's contributing to inequality. It's contributing to the gap in our country between the haves and the have-nots. It's just a huge issue. Marriage among the upper income and upper educational groups is holding pretty steady. It's just falling apart in the 60% of the rest of the country. And so there's a class issue. Marriage is now dividing the country that it used to unite. It's dividing the country along class lines. It's contributing to inequality. So if people care about a social justice agenda, this has to be a part of it. Number three, and again, back to the gay and straight issue, I think we ought to strive to put an end to the conflict between gay rights and family values. Family values, faith in family values has always been the kind of a phrase or a term that means that we're for strong families. We're for people making commitments and being real about participating as members of families and of having marriages that last. And so family values. And
it also, just to interrupt briefly, because I want to interject this, and it's also something that has come perhaps unfairly in your view to also be associated with people who are against gay marriage as well. And what you're saying is that a more enlightened perspective would perhaps say that gay marriage values are family values.
That's the point. That's the point I'm trying to say. You put an end to the conflict between gay rights and family values. You have a society in which both political parties, and as a part of any pro-family agenda that they put forward, has to seamlessly integrate gay equality into strong families. You put an end to this old culture war conflict. Doesn't mean it's an easy thing to do. Doesn't mean that all questions evaporate. Doesn't mean that, it doesn't mean that all the giving has to be on one side. I mean, I have lots of challenges for my gay and lesbian fellow citizens about, do you just want the right to get married? Is that it? Do you just want to gain access? Or what about to what degree do gay and lesbian Americans not only want the right to marry, but and I think more and more, the way I see it, they don't just want the right. They want to participate in it and be a custodian of the institution. That's the challenge, and leave it stronger for the next generation. And so long term, we want a society where there's no longer a conflict between gay equality and family values. Those two things, 4 or 5 years ago, and to some degree even today, those two things are seen as like in tension with one another. Like people in one camp are not in the other camp. The scholars that are working in favor of one of those ideas are against those working in the other. What we want to do is eliminate that tension and make it one thing, so that the problems we have are no longer problems that are premised on sexual orientation. They're just problems of human beings, wrestling in their own imperfect ways, all of us, to try to live up to the calling of the institutions of marriage and family. But the innies and outies are no longer defined by sexual orientation. That's what and I've learned this from. I've learned that this is not some idea I had. I've learned this from conversation with people in last couple of years over this issue. Like, this is an important part. It's not everything. The big picture is to look at the institution as a whole in society and see the big numbers and the big crisis. But this ethical issue of being welcoming to all those who want to be a part, that's one of the new things. That's part of the new conversation.
Yeah, I just wanted to, because what you've been talking about has made me think of how you're approaching this issue from the perspective of marriage is in itself good, inherently good, and it makes me think of people who are on the exact opposite side of this issue. People who were on the side of gay rights, who are perhaps also being marginalized as you have up to this point been marginalized by people on your side who are saying, well, maybe marriage is not something that we want, who are questioning the idea of marriage being something that is inherently good. And this is not something that I really know a lot about. It's not something I've really thought about. I am a gay man, and I am a gay man who intends to get married and have a family someday. But I was wondering if you could just, what would you say to people who are skeptical in general to the importance of marriage?
Well, when I wrote my book and I was arguing against gay marriage, I quoted just lots and lots of people like that, and it's not hard to find those books and articles. And particularly a few years ago, you had lots of gay writers and intellectuals and leaders who said, this is the last thing we want, is to imitate these heterosexuals by participating in this terrible institution. I mean, you just had book after book after book, and it was really only more recently in our history. I mean, I credit people like Evan Wolfson and others who really just got out there and organized at the grassroots level and said, look, here we are in the 1990s, and we can embrace this institution in a positive way. And I thought he was dead wrong when he first started doing it, but I've come to really respect. I always respected what he was doing, but I now see that this is the vision, but there's always going to be some heterosexuals who don't like marriage too. They're going to think it's too restraining, and they want a vision of freedom that is inconsistent with the institutional constraints. And go in peace. I mean, this isn't a life that's for everybody, but it's a life that ought to be available for all those who want it. And most, a lot of people are. I mean, I saw there was a book recently an article in a book by, I don't know if this was a gay writer or a straight writer, but said that, she was worried that gay people would not only feel that they had the right to get married, but would feel the pressure to get married. That's the way she put it. And she thought that was bad. She was worried about that. And marriage is to some degree, I guess you might call it a conservatizing institution. It structures your life in a certain way, and I don't know. I mean, if you had asked me a few years ago, if you had said, well, what do you think gay people really want with this institution? I probably would have said something that would embarrass me today. I probably would have said something, oh, they just want the brass ring. They just want access to it. This is just part of a symbolic effort for them to get approval. To be treated, to be viewed as, just fine and dandy because they can do anything that straight people can do. But do any of them, how many gay people really want to get married and live the life, live the married life? I mean, not that heterosexuals are doing very well at it, as you pointed out earlier in the conversation, but I might have said something along those lines, very skeptical, And now I really have come to see it differently. I mean, I see people. I just see people I know, and they're these gay couples. They look very much like straight couples to me, except, well, they're not straight, but they are. They're committed to one another, and they're establishing households and families, and the issues that they struggle with and think about are very similar to the ones that their heterosexual neighbors are thinking about. So I don't know. I mean, what do you think is going to happen? Do you think that in 20 years marriage will be? I mean, what do you think is going to happen to gay America with this institution over the next 20 years?
I think that's a very good question, and I think it depends a lot on exactly how fast we make movement on this issue, on the universalization of gay marriage, on, I guess, not just the oh God, I'm having trouble with that word. Not only the standardization of gay marriage, but also of gay family relationships. As that becomes something that is more widely seen, more widely understood, more widely accepted, that itself, I mean, again, you have this whole chicken or the egg argument. What will come first? More, down-home American gay families, and then that will make it more plausible for gay marriage to be something that's legalized. Or as gay marriage becomes more prolific, there will be more of these families that arise. And I imagine, as you were saying, that that's something that will really go hand in hand.
I think it will. I mean, I tell you, man, the change I've seen in the last decade has just been remarkable. I mean, in some ways it was maybe epitomized by President Obama yesterday saying, Seneca, Selma, Stonewall. I mean, wow. I mean, you're 24. I don't even know if it's possible for you to understand how not possible it would have been for previous presidents to use those three words: Seneca, Selma, Stonewall. I mean, that was a big deal, and I don't really think that speech was leading the change as much as reflecting, just a kind of an articulate reflection of a change. And so I don't know. Maybe in 20 years it will be. I'll tell you, if you look historically, if you want to say minorities are people who have been marginalized or not completely outsider groups of some kind, outlaw groups, if you want to say it that way, marriage has consistently been an institution that has brought those groups into the mainstream, whether it be religious minorities or whether it be racial and ethnic, or whether it be now in the case of sexual orientation, we might be seeing the same thing. It could be that marriage will be the institution that, I don't know. I have a friend, I have a gay friend who just kind of jokes. He says, well, my goal is to make gay people as boring as straight people.
So just to make sure I understand what you're saying is that marriage might be a mirror that reflects how society is changing and how the institution itself changes over time?
It might be an indicator of bringing a group of people who were once saw themselves and to some degree were on the margins of life, of American life, into the very mainstream. In other words, the middle classization, or not middle classization, but sort of bourgeoisification or something. It takes a group that I guess you might say it might reduce gay differentness. That's another way of saying it, because you're participating in the same institutions that straight people are participating in. The most important one being marriage. It could be that there will be less differentness. And that, in some, of course, there are going to be some in the community that say that's bad or that's worrisome, but it could be that that's the trend,
Right. Yeah. Actually, I think you bring up something interesting in that I do believe that in the gay community there is this sort of pull, I guess, because there are people who say I just want to fit in, and that these are people who are saying that these are the proponents of gay marriage. They see that other people are able to get married and able to get families, and I don't want to codify this in like a way that makes them selfish, but they want what those people have. I mean, they want the feeling that they too are normal and accepted as something as normal. And then there are people who say, well, maybe we're not normal, and maybe that can be seen as them clinging to this subculture that still exists and perhaps was more prevalent.
That'd be a good way to put it. I mean, there's always going to be some subculture, I guess, but how strong will that be defined? How strong will that be in the identity of gay and lesbian Americans, 10 or 20 years from now versus now or versus 10 or 20 years ago? And my hypothesis is that there will be a reduction of differentness, just kind of a, I don't know whether you want to call it mainstreaming or something, and you know, I guess with gains as well as losses. You know what I mean? I mean, you know, not everybody's going to think that's good, and some people are going to say that's not good. I remember Fran Lebowitz saying, you know, God, it's the last thing. She said, they asked her, she's a comic, a very brilliant writer, lesbian.
Mm-hmm.
They said, ask her about gay marriage, and she said, you know, well, I guess I'm in favor of it if people want it, but I thought the great advantage of being gay was that I didn't have to do that, you know. I mean, the whole point was that I could live an entirely different kind of life from this, and outside of this institution that, you know, just makes me groan even thinking about it, you know. And, you know, now Lebowitz is, you know, she's now older herself, and I just don't know how many younger, I don't know how many younger gay people think that way. Maybe not so many, maybe a lot, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I don't feel comfortable speaking for all young gay people, obviously, but I do feel like it is something that is more of a vestige of the older gay community.
Yeah.
Some people who are more used to being born, come out and lived on the fringe,
mm-hmm.
who are more likely. But whereas, and I came out freshman year of college. I told my parents, and they were both incredibly accepting. And so I haven't really had the same experiences that they have had that would make them more wary of wanting to be a part of the society which may have been spurning them for decades and is now only recently coming to reappropriate them or want.
I'll tell you, man. I mean, you know, I mean, from what I'm able to understand in talking to people and reading, I mean, there were a lot of people who did not have that kind of experience when they told their parents and they told their you know, and it was a cause a lot of suffering, and you know, maybe that too is changing. I'm sure it is changing. I mean,
I think we're definitely a more fortunate generation nowadays.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's not perfect, and I think if you looked at a geographic distribution, it might be different depending on where you are, who you're talking to. But I think overall, we're curving in that direction.
Yeah. I have a friend, Mitchell Gold, who's got an organization called Faith in America, and he goes around, spends a lot of time talking with pastors and religious leaders about the messages coming from the pulpit about that, you know, that are, whether they are intended to be this way or not, they can be pretty, you know, they can be pretty upsetting, you know, to young gay people who are, you know, maybe some sitting there in that congregation trying to figure out when and what exactly to tell their parents about this, and then, you know, sometimes they hear just horrible things about, you know, God doesn't like them, and so on and so forth. And so, you know, he's trying to, and you have high rates of suicide among gay young people. So he's trying to, you know, I'm not saying everything he does is, you know, completely, you know, perfect, but I really admire the way he's, you know, kind of jumped in there and started having conversations with these pastors about this very subject. And I do think it's, I don't know, I'm not a big expert, but it does seem like it's changing, and it does seem like it's generally changing in a positive direction. And it seems like also there's a, you know, it depends on whether you're living, depends on where you're living, and it depends on social class and race and other things as to whether or not it, you know, you're going to be, how much suffering you're going to have to endure in the process.
Yeah, I would have to say that I do count myself as very fortunate of being where I am and being raised by who I was.
Yeah.
Obviously, the experience is not the same for everyone. And I do want to turn, as we come here in the home stretch, at least just briefly to your perhaps more conservative former brethren who deserted you. I don't want to, I mean, en masse is how I would describe it.
They're still my
after
brethren. I think of them that way anyway.
All right. Your still brethren who have dropped funding you en masse after your re-evaluation of where you stand on the issue of gay marriage. And I was just wondering, going forward, as we talk on this issue, as you try to bring people more to your way of seeing things, how best do you see yourself? How best do you see bringing them into the fold? How best do you think we would go about convincing people that perhaps they need to stand back from the edge, stand back from dramatizing it or stating this marriage conflict in such stark terms on both sides?
I don't know, man. I mean, again, this is something I think about every day. I mean, I think the pragmatic argument that says, well, people are changing their minds and, the country's mind, I don't think that's so effective, because people take this real seriously, and, a lot of folks don't say, well, okay, if I'm a minority, I'm a minority, but I have to do what I think is right, whether or not people approve or not. Part of the issue, I'm just going to speak very tentatively about this, because I'm still wrestling with this. It's been a very painful experience for me in many ways. Part of it, I think, does really come down to whether or not you think that homosexual conduct is a sin. I mean, if that's what you believe, then it's very hard to imagine you ever supporting gay marriage or anything. I mean, that's just it. So part of it is the traditional teaching that a lot of people have experienced, whether or not it's from the pulpit or from the streets or from books or from, grandma or grandpa, but the idea that homosexual activity is just inherently bad. So part of it is answering that question and trying to, maybe encourage people to just take a hard look at that before they just repeat the traditional thing that they've said about it. And then, but another thing that I feel more, maybe, I feel like, needs to be done is you need to recruit the people on both sides of this issue who care about the institution. Not that they agree on everything, but in other words, there's some people on the, I'm going to say left, I have no idea, these terms, these labels, I don't like them, but
yeah, they come to mean basically anything you want.
Anything people want to mean.
So difficult to nail them
down.
But
if all you care about is the right of it, and you don't care about the thing itself, then the people that the religious folks and the people that come from a more traditional, they're just there's no communication there, because they care about the institution. I'll just tell you. You said former brethren, and I said no, still brethren. I mean, the reason I still care so much about this group of people is because they really care about the institution of marriage. Excuse me. So you find that can be a way of finding some common ground. It might be a little bit weird at first to think about it, but you can say, okay, well, you have a growing number of gay and lesbian Americans who feel the same way, and you may not agree on everything, but you have the shared the shared commitment to the institution. And I'm trying to have that kind of conversation in the hope that over time that will create relationships. I mean, for me, I'll tell you, some of it's intellectual, but I'll tell you, man, most of it for me has been about personal relationships. And, as an intellectual, you like to think, oh, well, it's all about what you've read about and thought about, and, you live in this kind of intellectual, thing where you're so proud of yourself in terms of your thinking, of, your analytic abilities and so on. But I'll tell you, for me, a lot of this has just been about meeting people. And, so I think the more relationships that happen that are across these boundaries, the better off we're all going to be.
All right. Well, I just want to thank you, David, once again for coming on and talking to me, and I hope the listeners at home have enjoyed this conversation and my first guest hosting. And I hope you have a good rest of your day. I think this is a pretty good place to stop it.
Good. Well, I've enjoyed talking to you, and yeah, appreciate it. Hope we can do it again sometime.
Yeah, hopefully we can do it again. This was a lot of fun.
All right.
All right.
Take care, man.
You have
Bye.
take care.